This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
And welcome to the program. I'm Roby Brock. We are glad to have you with us. Joined by Senator Tom Cotton today. Always good to get him in studio. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you, Roby.
All right. How you holding up?
Things are great.
Yeah, good.
Beautiful spring weekend in Arkansas, and it was a beautiful spring week in Washington as well. Cherry blossoms were out.
Good. Very nice. All right, let's get to it. I've been following your Twitter feed lately. You've had a lot to say about a lot of things. So I'm not going to go on all of them, but I'm going to pick a few of them here. And talk about some business that you're after here. About you want to see some legislation that will keep state and federal prisons from allow them to jam cell phone signals.
Yeah.
Tell me why this is an issue.
Yeah, we've had several wardens or prison guards come to us over the recent months and tell us that cell phones in prisons are a real problem. You know, there was just a report in the news last week that Martin Shkreli, the so-called pharma bro, that went to jail for fraud against American seniors for jacking up drug prices, was still running his business from prison using a cell phone.
How do you get a cell phone in business?
I think it's the same way you smuggle any, same way you smuggle in drugs or cigarettes or nail files or whatever.
That would be a pretty obvious one for people to see.
But one simple way to, I'd like to see nothing smuggled into prisons, obviously, but one simple way to solve the cell phone problem is to allow prisons to use cell phone jammers so even if someone does get a cell phone into a prison, they can't use it to manage a business the way Shkreli does, or even worse, to continue a criminal enterprise.
You think you got support for that?
I think we will have support for it, yeah. Jammers in general are illegal in our country, and there's some concern about the slippery slope. I don't usually buy into those arguments, though, because you can draw a line between, say, a prison on the one hand and a movie theater on the other hand.
You are also talking about China a little bit. You're worried about Huawei. I never can say their name properly there. And their 5G technology adoption. There are several of our allies that say they trust that they're not going to use that technology for spy purposes. This seems like a history lesson we may be doomed to repeat.
Well, those allies are wrong. Allies like Australia and Japan, who recognize the threat that Chinese telecoms pose, are correct. 5th-generation wireless technology, which will be showing up on your phone soon enough. You know, most of your phones will say 4G, 5G is just the next iteration, but it is a massive, massive move ahead in wireless technology. It'll power things like not just your phones, but machines and appliances in your homes and so forth. Huawei, the Chinese telecom giant, is one of the biggest telecom companies in the world in the 5G sector. And they ultimately dance to the tune that the Chinese Communist Party calls. I've encouraged all of our allies, anytime I meet with them, not to use Chinese telecoms. I've spoken with small rural telecoms in Arkansas. They get the message. They understand that telecommunications technology and information technology today is no less valuable or critical to our national security and our prosperity than, say, steel and aluminum or tank manufacturing was during the Cold War.
Speaking of China, we still have an ongoing conversation about trade talks with China. Do you seeing anything that convinces you that we are making progress on that front?
So what I see that convinces me we're making progress is the Chinese being very aggressive in trying to get to a bargain, and the president holding firm on getting a good bargain for our farmers and our ranchers and our manufacturers as well. He wants a trade deal. I want a trade deal as well, but I want one that's a good deal for the United States, which we've never had with China, and one in which we know that the Chinese will stick to their end of the bargain.
So what are elements of a good deal for you?
So that they stop stealing our intellectual property. You know, we've had Chinese espionage conducted against our rice farmers here in Arkansas. They're out in Silicon Valley trying to steal information technology that's critical to the future of our economy and our national security. That when you go to work in China, whether you're a tech giant like Apple or a small manufacturer, you're not forced to partner with a Chinese company that ultimately can expropriate all of your assets and your intellectual property. So those are some of the steps that I think we have to take if we want to have a good trade deal with China. But just more generally, like everything that China has done at every point, whether it's trade, intellectual property theft, drug exportation into our country, they've taken advantage of us for years. We need to stop that.
You're talking, as you're out there running around the state, different parts of the state, you're talking to Arkansas farmers, you're talking to Arkansas manufacturers, many of whom have been impacted by these Chinese, this tariff war between the U.S. and China. How much longer do you think they could and should hold on? Because there is a request for them to be patient and ride this out. You can't be patient into bankruptcy.
Yeah, that's right. I think they understand the president is trying to get a good deal for them. And in some cases, they're not necessarily losing markets. They're losing hopes of gaining a market. You know, it doesn't surprise you to know we don't sell a lot of rice into China. We'd love to, but those aren't markets that we've lost. They're markets that right now we're not able to continue to try to get access into.
We have lost a lot of soybean sales.
But that's what the president
China.
is trying to do. The president is trying to open up all those markets that we don't currently have, or like pork or beef or what have you. So look, no one wants to pay tariffs, whether they are businesses or consumers, but they also understand that if we're going to have free trade, that trade has to be fair between our nations, and it has to be enforceable as well.
Let's hit one more topic before we take a commercial break here. Let's talk about this crisis at the border that has been hyped. Some would say overhyped. Some would say not raised to a high enough level. We've had this threat of a migrant caravan back in November. We've seen children separated from their parents, as you have seen, and some of the and folks that have quite honestly gotten lost in the system there. We've had former Homeland Security directors say that there is definitely a crisis at the border as things have ramped up. The president wants to declare this state of emergency. I'm getting this feeling that we're entering boy who cried wolf territory. We have continually see these warnings and warnings and warnings. I'm not sensing that things have busted loose per se. What is your take on where we stand?
No, Robbie, we really do face a crisis at our border. Just last month, March, we saw some of the largest numbers of illegal immigrants show up at our borders we've seen in 10 years. It's a different kind of illegal immigration than we've seen in past, though. In the past, it's often been young men who are coming here to try to work illegally, so they're sneaking across the border. Today, we have adults showing up with children who they claim are their own children. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't.
Right.
They're not running away from the Border Patrol, they're running to the Border Patrol, because the word is out in Central America that if you show up with a child, that's basically a magic talisman that gets you in the country for free, gets you a work
lately,
permit.
though, not when the separation policy has been in place. So shouldn't we adjudicate more quickly and put more resources
we should,
towards
no, we
adjudicating
should.
that?
No, we absolutely should adjudicate more quickly. We should try to take advantage of rapid DNA technology so we can identify on the border who's an actual child and who's a trafficked minor, so we can take care of that minor and we can deal with the person who's been trafficking that person, try to get into the country. We should deal more with modular housing to try to keep people at the border. But right now we do face a genuine crisis of a surge of so-called family units who are showing up, again, going to the Border Patrol, not running away from the Border Patrol, saying, I have a credible fear of persecution, that's the magic words, and I have a child, which basically lets me get into the country and get a work permit and never show up for a hearing in the future.
What the president has talked about completely closing the Mexican border. Would you support
Well,
that?
I don't know that would solve the problem, Roby, because again, people are not trying to escape capture. They're trying to be captured. They're presenting themselves and saying, I'm seeking asylum. The problem is with our asylum laws and with liberal judges who have tied the hands of the Border Patrol. We need to change those laws. We need to get those court orders modified. In the meantime, we need to do the kind of quick acting steps at the border, like DNA testing technology or like modular housing, that can actually address the crisis on a day-to-day basis.
Because right now, you'd be opposed to closing the border, though, completely.
I wouldn't want to close the border if it wasn't going to solve the problem. And again, right now, the problem is not people trying to run across the border in the middle of the night. It's people showing up and making false claims of asylum.
All right. He's Senator Tom Cotton. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll come back and talk about a few more items right after this word from our sponsors. And welcome back to the program. I'm Roby Brock, joined by U.S. Senator Tom Cotton. Let's talk about, you're up for re-election in 2020. You realize that's just like a year away. You know this.
Yeah.
What do you think you've accomplished as a U.S. Senator? What are you going to run on as things that you have achieved?
Well, there's a whole host of things both on the domestic front and the international front. Because of my action on the tax bill 2 years ago, 60,000 Arkansans who can't afford their health insurance are no longer being fined by the government for not being able to afford the insurance that Obamacare made unaffordable in the first place. Arkansas families got a tax cut. A lot of them are getting money back in their pockets this month because of that tax bill. Arkansas seniors have more choices on generic drugs and therefore paying lower prices for drugs. You know, I've stood up to bad immigration plans. I've promoted good immigration plans. I've stood with law enforcement during some pretty tough times over the last 4 years for law enforcement. On the international front, I've worked every day to try to keep Arkansans safe and to defend this country, whether it was convincing the president to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal or recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and the Golan as sovereign territory of Israel, trying to rebuild our military so we can deter our adversaries from ever taking a shot at the title to begin with. I'm very proud of the record that I've compiled along with my colleagues in Washington over the last 6 years, 4 years in the Senate, and I'm looking forward to the re-election campaign next year.
Let's go back to taxes there. You talked about some people are getting some refunds and keeping some money, but there are some that got a little bit hosed with the way that the withholding worked there. Is there a correction in place?
Well, ultimately, they're still paying lower taxes, and to anyone who saw their withholdings go down in 2018 in their weekly paychecks, and then had to pay some tax due this year, that would be corrected this year in withholdings, obviously.
All right, we have not gotten to the magical controversy of the last 2 years. The Mueller investigation has come to some sort of conclusion in terms of his report's been handed over to the Department of Justice. The controversy at the present time is, should the Mueller report be made public? What do you think?
So I'll just say first off, Roby, as I've said all along, Russia is not our friend. They interfered in our democratic processes in 2016. They will continue to do that. That's why we have to take a firm line against Russia, as I always have, and as this president does a lot better than the last president. Russian interference, though, is a different question from collusion by the Trump campaign and its associates. And the Mueller report, as quoted by Attorney General Barr in his letter to Congress, found no evidence whatsoever of any collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. That's what I've seen for 2 years on the Intelligence Committee as well.
You haven't seen the Mueller report, though.
I've not seen the Mueller report, but we've conducted our own inquiry using a lot of the same evidence, a lot of the same witnesses, and we've seen no evidence of collusion whatsoever. Now, should the Mueller report be made public? As the Attorney General said, I want to make as much public as possible. However, he said just in a letter this past week that every single page of the Mueller report, to include the summaries, was stamped with sensitive, possibly classified information. That's why they're going through the process of reviewing that material. He's going to make as much public as he possibly can. I hope that's the large majority of the Mueller report, just like I know the Attorney General is. But the Democrats have been accusing Donald Trump of colluding with Russians for 3 years now. I think they can wait a couple weeks so we can have a report released that doesn't compromise sensitive intelligence sources and methods or classify or sensitive grand jury material.
Yeah. I mean, we've kind of held off on our reporting on all of this to just let's wait and see if the report becomes public and what we can see.
It would be nice to have the facts in front of us before we jump to conclusions.
It would be nice to do that, wouldn't it? There. So, yet Russia does remain an adversary, as you mentioned there. Are we doing enough to be tough on Russia? Because you have got.
Well,
I'm sorry. Go
so
ahead.
We're doing a lot more. I would like to see us do even more.
What would you like to see us do?
So, for instance, we should crack down on the pipeline that Russia is building through the Baltic Sea to Germany. That's designed specifically to allow Germany to get more cheap Russian gas without putting German economic security at stake for Polish and Baltic national security. Okay. So it allows Russia to bypass those countries where pipelines currently run and therefore put pressure on them without having that pressure felt by German families and then therefore by the German government. Russia continues to make a lot of mischief in the Black Sea, in the Sea of Azov. I'd like to see us support the government of Ukraine in their efforts to defend their territorial waters and their territory against Russia intrusion. We've sent strong messages. Some have been in the news, some of which I can't discuss, that the kind of interference we saw in our electoral processes in 2016 we will no longer tolerate. So there are more steps we could take. I will say this, though, that this administration has been tougher on Russia as a matter of policy than the last administration by far.
And there are some that would dispute that because the president has been lax with some information when, for instance, when he's met with Russian officials in the Oval Office, he has said he didn't believe that Putin interfered with Russian elections in 2016. So you do see where that point of view is coming from.
But those people would be wrong.
They'd be wrong? Because those things haven't happened?
No, but if you look at the policies of this administration towards Russia,
maybe more the policies of the U.S. Senate.
But Barack Obama would not provide defensive weapons to Ukraine, anti-tank weapons, so Ukrainians could protect themselves from Russian tanks. This administration did. This administration withdrew from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which even the Obama administration acknowledged Russia had been violating for over a decade. We've sanctioned dozens of senior Russian officials and oligarchs that are closely connected to Vladimir Putin that escaped sanction in the Obama administration. So in a matter of U.S. policy towards Russia, we are in a much better place today than we were for 8 years before today.
All right. Hey, Senator Tom Cotton. He's running for re-election in 2020. Good luck to you.
Thanks,
I know
Roby.
you'll be back a few times between now and then.
Appreciate it.
All right. We're back with more right after this word from our sponsors, including my conversation with Speaker of the House, Matthew Shepard. Stick around.